Hello and welcome to today's Snap session, Remote Communications with Residents. More and more property managers are working from home or have adjusted office hours. So how do you maintain a presence with your residents without, actually being present? I'm Jessica Fior, Managing Editor of Multi-Housing News, and here today with me is Michael Baker, Software Sales Executive at Notifii, to discuss the best ways to manage remote communication across a property. Thank you for joining me today, Michael.
Hey, Jessica, thanks for having me.
Before we get started, please note that Notifii has provided an informational COVID messaging guide available to live attendees, which you can access on your dashboard in the Handouts tab. Also, we're going to leave some time at the end of the session to answer your questions, but please feel free to submit them at any time using the control panel on the right. Please also note that we are recording the session and it will be available for later viewing. So Michael, why don't you introduce yourself to everyone?
Sure. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Michael Baker. I'm an account executive and marketing consultant at Notifii. Some of my responsibilities here include conceptualizing sales strategies, marketing plans, as well as representing our company at trade shows and online events like this one. I've been a copywriter for several years now, both at Notifii and my previous company, Entercom Communications, which is a digital marketing broadcast radio company. During my time there, I wrote scripts and copy for everything from email and social campaigns to radio and TV commercials. So today I'm going to provide some insight on how communications have changed for property managers over the last 6 months and what you can do to preserve and build your relationship with your residents through digital solutions. I'm also joined here by our marketing director, Sneha. She is responsible for conducting a lot of our market research when it comes to property management communications. So she may chime in here as well a little later on. But other than that, thanks again for having me, and let's jump right in.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for joining us. So with the increase of mobile and email marketing during this time, how could property managers stand out in a crowd?
Sure. So first off, I'd say personalize it. Your residents know who you are, so really cash in on that personal connection you share with your community. Is something, an edge that you have over pretty much any other kind of email that's going to come into their box from another company. Use relevant language and verbiage that is specific to your community. This could include the name of your community or even team members' names. Just anything that's relevant will drive more engagement. Also, using messaging that shows you care within each message. So hope you're staying healthy and well, wishing you the best. It may sound a little cliche, but it does add a personal element to it to add some empathy to your message. And also something that you might want to consider is weekly or monthly newsletters. And you can include COVID and how it's impacting your operations on site. Developing a routine like that with your residents can often help drive further engagement. So if you send a message every Tuesday afternoon, for instance, your residents will begin to expect to receive that message and will often mentally prepare to be prepared to look over that message.
And so you mentioned COVID, obviously the most important thing on everyone's mind right now. What kind of conversations are you seeing on your platform since the beginning of the pandemic?
Yeah. Well, I'd like to start out by clearly stating that we don't review any message content for privacy reasons, respect the privacy of our platform users. But I can tell you just from talking with our clients that they are experiencing more conversations regarding non-payment, late rent, payment schedules, health guidelines, resident tension. I mean, people are kind of cooped up, so a little tension between residents here and there. All very important, but often stressful topics. So we've been trying to tell them that it's very good to be calm and collected when dealing with these issues because a lot of tension is raised within the community. But I suppose that's not much of a surprise to any property managers that are listening right now.
And so what about if residents aren't following COVID guidelines, not wearing masks if they're required? How would you address these complaints, especially if you're not there to see it? What would you do?
Sure. I mean, the most important thing is to address it as soon as possible or as soon as it happens. The sooner you tourniquet the problem, the better off you're going to be. The last thing you want is for an upset resident to fester, especially if the dilemma involves relations between two or more residents. So addressing it quickly, addressing it professionally, and then maybe for an added step at the end, if you want to send out a community-wide reminder regarding COVID procedures and potential penalties for not following them, I'm sure you can implement some similar penalties that you use for excessive noise complaints, not picking up dog waste, things like that. You might be able to also incur for not following COVID procedures.
Maybe if they're not following procedures, they're the ones who had to pick up the dog. So
there you go. There you go.
That would get me to wear my mask right away. What factors should property managers consider when crafting a message to their residents? And what's the goal of sending this message?
That's really just it. Is you got to consider what is your goal sending this message. You need to know where you're going and how you're going to get there. Like for certain topics, are you considering sending out a community-wide update that doesn't require a response? In that case, consider information that should be brief, clear, to the point. Or are you trying to survey something, get a response from your residents regarding a certain subject? Then you got to make sure that you have a clear call to action at the end, so you're properly driving engagement with your residents and letting them know you are looking for a response back to them. Some other things to consider is like even age demographic of the resident. If you're trying to reach millennials or Gen X, you should definitely be texting them for better engagement. And something else to consider is grouping your residents. So for instance, if you're notifying building 100 that you're shutting off the water for maintenance, does building 300 really need to receive that message? Unnecessary communications ultimately lead to decreased engagement. So making sure you're sending relevant content to just the appropriate residents can help keep that engagement up over time. But ultimately, just keep in mind of what you're trying to accomplish with every message, and ask yourself, is this message going to generate the response I'm looking for?
So you recommend fewer messages than just sending out a bunch to everyone?
Yeah, I mean, just make sure that you're sending out messages with content that's going to be relevant to everybody that's in that recipient group. You don't want to send out a message that only maybe 20% of the population of your community is really going to be interested in this content, because the other 80% are going to learn to be disassociated and disengaged with the messages as soon as they open it up. So you don't want to get in that habit. Make sure that it's relevant content every time.
And you mentioned texting for some of the millennials and Gen Z. Do people have to opt in, or can you just start sending messages right away?
It really depends. You usually want to get permission to start communicating with people on a new platform. However, if they've provided you with information, especially in the property management realm, you're going to have usually their texting number, their email, just from the leasing process. And at that point, that is an opt-in. They are giving you their information, contacting them. So what we most of the time recommend is sending a welcome text or a welcome email, while providing the option to reply, stop, or unsubscribe from those messages. So you are still contacting them, but also respecting their privacy within that effort of communication.
Sure. And you mentioned common factors to communicate with residents, such as water being shut off. Are there other factors that should be considered now during this situation regarding communication?
Yeah. I mean, just keep in mind, people are stressed and unsure of what's going on in the world right now. Acknowledge it. Make sure you deliver your message in a way that sympathizes with the state of unease we're all in right now. Also keep in mind that email frequency is much higher right now. Just on our platform, we've seen an email usage increase of over 50% in March and April. So maybe consider texting to kind of break through that clutter. A lot of companies are sending out more emails trying to drive revenue, because there's obviously been a dip in the economy right now. So you don't want to get flooded down in everything that's in their inbox. One thing I'll also note is that consider preparation. Preparing templates for certain emergency or time-sensitive scenarios will help you dramatically if those scenarios occur. So an example would be, we have a client in Texas who experienced a flash flood. They had a dam locally that overflowed during a big storm down there. So they had a template. Yeah, really horrible situation. But they had a template ready for an evacuation for this kind of scenario already set. So they sent it out very quickly. Luckily, everybody was able to get out of that community very quick. Nobody got harmed. So it was very effective for them. It's best to have templates already worked up, so when you're in a potentially urgent or emotional scenario like that, you aren't under extra pressure to compose something from the ground up at that time. And this falls under COVID. So if somebody on the property were to test positive or something like that, and you were to find out about it, you want to have that language ready so you can send it out quickly.
And so, in general, though, what makes good content? What should property managers be sending?
Yeah, so this has changed a little bit over time, but really short and sweet is the best nowadays. Most people barely read full messages as it is. Most people skim. So try and keep it short. If it is long, we do have those messages that are obligatorily just long messages. We have to get all the content in there. So try and add bold words, underline the subjects, better highlight key points of your message, just so you can get the point across to those skimmers. Also make it action driven, make it very clear to your residents how you would like them to respond to the message. We talked about that relevant language. Even using your community name and employees' names can help your message seem more personal. And then also personalize your message if you're capable. So a lot of different platforms offer dynamic placeholders, which will auto-populate the resident first name, their unit number per each resident and message that's sent out. So using very specific content like that will ultimately drive better engagement for your residents because they'll see, oh, this is sent directly to me with my name and my unit. So
Oh,
it'll pick
cool.
up their attention a little better. Yeah.
And what do you do after you launch a campaign?
The most important thing after you launch a campaign is just make sure you're available for two-way communication afterwards. Be available to answer any questions from the campaign, especially if your message is involving delinquency or a resident complaint, one of those tense scenarios. You want to make sure you're available for a quick response. The more responsive you are, the more engagement you're going to receive in the long run. Just an example, we have a new client in the Midwest that came in this last year, Tamarack Properties, who was experiencing resident tension over limited communication at their front office. I mean, they were still using paper flyers to communicate with over 500 units on the property.
Oh my gosh,
So
it's a lot of photocopying.
Yeah, it's a lot of paper waste too. So when inquiries, complaints, or questions came in, the response wasn't always swift, as you could probably assume there. So once they switched to a texting platform or even just a thorough email communication platform, the resident rapport increased dramatically, just simply due to being more available to their residents for communication. On another note, what you should do afterwards is that if you have the capability to review engagement analytics, it'll help you better plan your next steps. So being able to see who's opened your message, who's clicked on your provided links, all helps with navigating your next step. So for instance, if you're dealing with a non-payment situation, your approach may change if a resident has opened and ignored every email you've sent versus maybe they haven't opened any of them. At that point, you may, do you still have their current contact information? Are they even getting your notices? So the analytics can usually help navigate how you're going to approach your next attempt at communication with that resident.
What do you do if someone receives them all and hasn't opened them?
Ultimately, try and contact them through another platform. So if you're emailing them and they haven't opened any of your emails, maybe send them a text saying, hey, we've sent you a few emails. Have you gotten any of these messages? Have you changed your email? Try and get some updated contact information. Just ultimately try and contact them on another platform and make sure that your credentials are good at that point. And hopefully they're just not being neglectful.
So speaking of that, how do you minimize unsubscribers and, people viewing your messages as spam? Because obviously we want our residents to, read the important information you're sending.
Right. So ultimately, kind of repeating some of the things I said earlier, those recipient groups can really help keep unsubscribe rates down by keeping that relevant information for each group. But another thing you might want to consider is segmentation of content categories. So when you're sending out mass messages, you may want to one we see common within our platform is community service notifications and events and promotions. So for instance, one resident may want to still receive those notices about their water main being shut off. However, they may not care about the Taco Tuesday promotion that's going on at the clubhouse.
Everyone cares about the Taco Tuesday promotion.
That's fair. That was a bad example. Everybody loves Taco Tuesday. But that lets them, if maybe they want to receive only crucial and important information, if you have a subset category, they'll stay subscribed to that one, and then they can subscribe from the promotional stuff. So that'll help keep your important contacts with your residents up by creating those segment categories. Another thing you can do is ask your residents to add you to their contact list, especially if you're in Gmail or something. If they add you to a preferred recipient or preferred sender, This can help keep your messages out of spam and at the top of their inbox.
Oh, great. That's a really good tip. What do you consider a good engagement rate or open rate?
So this is a hard question to answer just because I don't want to spew out a number that you just should attach to as a goal. I mean, it really depends on what your audience looks like and who you're talking to, because if you're sending out, say, a cold call or just a cold email to a bunch of prospects that you haven't contacted before, engagement of maybe 8% open rate on an email might be great for that with a 0.05 click through. However, if you're messaging your residents that have given you their email that you've talked to and you have a building or an established relationship with, anything under an open rate of 50% might be concerning. So ultimately, focus on improvements, not specific benchmarks. If you're getting more of an open percentage, if you're getting more engagement, more responses, and better communication from your residents over time, that's what you want to attach to, is just improvement. Aim for improvement, not necessarily just a benchmark.
How does this all play into word of mouth marketing?
Yeah. Ultimately, a stellar communication experience helps drive the conversation that residents have with their friends and their family. So a phrase that we use is load their lips. Provide them with the language you'd like to use. So consistent messaging often leads to your residents using that same language to describe your community when they're out and about. So load their lips.
Great. What changes should property managers make in their follow-up approaches with prospective residents?
Yeah, so when it comes to prospects, ultimately text more. Emails by themselves are great as a soft touch and definitely something you should keep on using. But texting keeps the conversation informal and gives your prospective resident the sense that they're a priority. Also, we've just seen that, I know we're more of a sales conversation now, but response rates for text messages are 60% higher than email. And also, we know that 90% of text messages are read within about 3 minutes of delivery. So you're going to get a much higher engagement rate with the text message and a higher response rate than you are with the email. So unless the caveat to that is unless your residents are over the age of 60. But if you're dealing with millennials, Gen Z, Gen X, texting is going to be the fastest and most effective way to communicate with your prospective residents.
What are your views on social media? Should property managers be using that as well?
Oh, absolutely. Any platform that you can get your branding out there to gain interest from prospective residents, you should be on. Especially social media is great for really providing an image and a visual to your branding. So yeah, I would definitely say that is platforms. If you're looking to drive more leases and drive more sales, you should certainly be on every social media platform you can think of, ultimately.
Are there ways to craft your message differently on social media versus email and text? Is there anything you should consider with that?
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking social media and text message, more colloquial, personable, as if you're talking, just having a regular conversation with them is better. You don't want to sound too salesy. However, people expect you to be more professional when it comes to an email. So more rigid, professional in the email, and just talk like a human, talk like a normal person when you're going with text message and social media platforms.
Talk like a human should be my... Sorry. Sneha, go ahead.
Yeah, just to kind of jump off what Michael said there, a big part of social is taking that same messaging you're sending over to residents or prospects and turning it into a narrative. The more you can paint a picture of what it looks like to live in your property and be a resident at your property, the better it is for the people trying to learn more about it. They want to see visuals. They want to have a clear picture painted. And a huge part not to ignore on social is reviews. Nearly every platform, especially on Facebook, people are actively reviewing on those platforms. And if you have content to back up your reviews, it paints a much stronger idea of what residents' life is at your property, and they have specific questions to ask to follow up afterwards.
So you mentioned reviews. What if you get a bad review? Should you respond? Should you say, I'll respond to you offline? What's your move there?
always respond, whether it's a bad review, a good review, or one that someone didn't put a lot of thought into. It's your choice, really, if you want to take part of it offline, but always respond with thank you for the feedback. A thank you shows that you care about what people are saying about your community and that you're invested in the whole process. And continue on to either address the issue directly, say, if you understand what the root cause of the problem is and you can explain it clearly and don't mind putting that explanation out in the public, go for it. If it's something that you feel has to be taken offline, let's say it has to do with personal information, or maybe somebody left a bad review because they had issues with the delinquency of rent payment. Thank them for the feedback. Say, we're sorry for any frustration that you felt. One of our team members, maybe even name the team member, is going to give you a call later today. And and this is a step a lot of property managers and even business owners forget. After you've had the conversation with the person who left the bad review, follow up on that same review and leave a note. Hey, just so you know, I gave you a call today. I'm glad we were able to work things out.
Oh, that's a really important step.
Quite often
Go ahead.
I was just saying it's a really important step and quite often missed, but it can go really far.
So I do want to hear more about that, but I want to get to some questions from our audience. So let me turn it over now. Can you talk about email KPIs, click to open versus open rate? What should we be focusing on?
Tristan, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure thing. So when you're talking about KPIs, you want to envision it a little bit like a funnel. Open rate's the very top, so how many people are paying attention, and that's a good benchmark to see if your subject line is working. Is the baseline theme of your content important? So do pay attention to that. I am not a fan of click to open rate. It's essentially just a different framework for open rate. I focus more so on click-through rate, actually seeing how many people are engaging with the email itself and making their way onto the intended landing page. It's a better way to gauge how effective the actual content within the email is. And also, depending on the platform you're utilizing, you can see what links they're clicking more, how they're clicking it, and track that same sort of metric back to your website analytic tools.
Do you have recommendations on growing social presence, and what platforms are the best?
Yeah, for growing social presence, a big part of it that I find is often ignored is interacting with other accounts that aren't your own. You can consistently post, you can build your narrative, make sure everything on your page includes the right information, be fun, friendly, all of the things that nearly every blog and website will tell you about social. But if you're not interacting with other accounts as your business or as your property, you're missing out on the opportunity to capitalize on somebody else's presence. So for example, if one of your residents shares something about living at your property directly on their page, or they tag you on something, or they're referencing, having a great time at the pool, feel free to comment and say, oh, wow, great, I'm glad you're having a great time. Now everybody within their network can see that too. A great platform to utilize that on is LinkedIn. LinkedIn is very straightforward in that people within the network can see anything as long as they're connected in a certain way. And that's a great way to grow that, especially if you want to attract a lot of professionals. It's also on Facebook. A great strategy is to consistently talk about resident stories and tag residents within your posts. The more people you get involved with it, the more human your brand is, and it'll grow organically. You also have the option of creating groups. Groups on Facebook is a fantastic tool, and it'll help you keep your residents engaged all together and showcase a sense of community before anybody even becomes a resident.
What cadence do you recommend for email? Do you recommend using automated campaigns? And do you have examples of these?
The cadence is really dependent on your group. For general announcement emails or just I would recommend at least one email a month that's more of what's going on in your neighborhood. You know, just general announcements, putting together all the content that you've sent out during the month so they have that on a regular basis. Automated campaigns is great for prospects because you generally wind up finding yourself using templates and you want to keep sending those out. So 4 to 5 of those. Just stick to the 7-touch method of bringing people in, but it's super dependent on how responsive your particular audience is. Test it out, work with different numbers, but you'll notice when you're exhausting your audience. So when last week's email had a fantastic open rate and this week's email has a very low one and it's the exact same audience, you're pushing them too far. Roll it back the next month.
Great. Well, this is very informative. It looks like we're running out of time unless we have any other questions or anything else. Michael or Sneha, you wanted to talk about that wasn't asked?
I mean, I think we've covered a lot of good material here. Thanks again for having us on here. It's been a lot of fun. I'm happy to get into more of the social trade show-esque kind of things, seeing as a lot of them have been canceled. Most of them have. So I'm really excited to be here, and thanks again for having us.
And if anyone has any questions that they didn't have a chance to ask and they want to reach out to Michael directly, you could email him at mbaker@notifii.com. Thank you again to Michael and Sneha for a really interesting session, and thank you to our sponsor, Notifii. Take care, everyone. Bye.